Well, hello everyone again. This is Marsha Sinetar. I want to welcome you to another archived recording, this time with a distant friend, another good friend, Dr. Carolyn Craft, a therapist in Durham, North Carolina, and you can find out about her online under Dr. Carolyn Craft. Well, this interview ostensibly is about self-reinvention. But actually, as I listened to it, I got the feeling that I was really talking about, in answering Carolyn's questions, I was really talking about unfolding our true self, our soul. Some people call it the divine spirit within. Others would say it's our heart values, the core self. And my thought is that on the way to that core self, that true self, we go through a lot of changes, and some of them, in fact, do involve a kind of foraging for the truth of who we are. So this involves, as Carolyn said, kind of a peeling back of the onion, layers and layers of falsity that we're uncovering, getting rid of, moving into something more authentic. It takes time. Not always, but generally, we're talking about a lifetime and another reinvention or uncovering of layers in later life as we get into our 70s, our 80s, our 90s. And we're still wanting more and more to be transparent, true, and real. And as I listen to this, I get the feeling that this archive is not just something that I'm hoping that you, the listener, will enjoy, but it's also something that's reminding me of all the wonderful support that I've had from distant friends, close friends, people I don't even know over the years. So I hope you'll enjoy it. Take a listen.
Now on Wisdom Radio, Carolyn Craft's Inner Wisdom. Heart-to-heart conversations revealing the wisdom within.
And welcome to this hour. I'm Carolyn Craft, and glad you are with us. The task of our lifetime, is there just one? Not just weathering, but maybe living from that place of gratitude and enthusiasm through each and every minor or major change in your life. That's what we're going to talk about this hour. We're going to look at the task of our lifetime in that we can reinvent ourselves. And with us this hour is Marsha Sinetar. She is an educator and corporate psychologist and author and a whole lot more. Her books, we're not going to give them all to you right now. We'll make sure you have her website. Sometimes Enough is Enough. She also has recently authored Don't Call Me Old, I'm Just Awakening. Thanks, Marsha, for being with us.
Oh, Carolyn, it's my pleasure. So nice to be with you.
Well, the thing that you're really wanting to address these days, I guess that's in your heart right now, is this idea of self-reinvention, and that you say that is the biggest or the task of our lifetime. Not like one time, I guess.
Right, not just one time, and you know this, each of us knows this from our experience. You know, in childhood, you kind of get it together, what kind of a person do I want to be? And so you're actively working on that. I think a whole lot of energy in childhood goes just into that question, looking around what your parents are doing, what other kids are doing. And in adolescence, of course, this gets stepped up as your hormones start raging, you know, and then young adulthood, you get in the workplace for the first time, and you're leaving home, and you're kind of divorcing mom and dad. You have to stand on your own 2 feet. Some of us do it sooner, and some of us never do it. We're finding our values. And what I've learned lately is that not only do we do that again in midlife and again in retirement, but when we get into way later life, let's say 90s and more, 80s, 90s and more, one day you look in the mirror and you look, and there's somebody looking back at you and you have to start all over again. Who am I? Who have I been? So it doesn't really end.
I think too. This is sort of a side note to that, but you just triggered this that, um, and I guess being over 50, I can say this.
Yeah.
And I didn't think about this in my 20s, but life is so fast.
Yes.
Duh, but it is so fast, and you're 80 and 90 before you know it.
Well, this is why I think these conversations are so helpful, because as busy as we get, as distracted as we get, there are a few anchors, that we can put down to make it, not only to slow time, because I don't know that we can do that, although in reality time is our construct, you know what I mean? It's a human idea. But we can make sure that it doesn't slip away from us through distraction and just mindless living. And that's what conversations like this, or with a close friend, or a journal, spiritual journal, meditation, prayer, all of these timeless activities have a way of making us more conscious so that time doesn't slip away from us.
Marsha, when does this self-reinvention become a lifetime task? Is it just, according to the individual, is it only when there seems to be major change, or how do you see that?
Well, I see that as a matter of consciousness. In other words, yes, when there's change, let's say we lose a job. The most common events are what we could call high stress events. We lose a job, we get married. These are both for good and not so good. What we normally call, we put a value judgment to it. We move. There's an illness in the family or a death, a graduation. All of these sort of document our life. And you can look back over your life and you can say, gee, what times in my life have I had a heightened sense of time passing? Even a birthday can do it, or a Christmas, or visit with people you haven't seen before. So that's the normal. The more enhanced way, if we're talking about consciousness, is that individuals who have a very rich inner life tend to take stock all the time. There are people who every morning, they wouldn't dare face the day without a quiet time, a prayerful time, a reading of one line of scripture, time with the family, in nature. I know a woman who goes out in her garden every morning. She has a Japanese garden. This is the Pacific Northwest. We don't have snow like they're having on the East Coast today. But she goes out with a cup of tea. She sits there and she just kind of gathers her wits and then goes and meets the day. So that's another way.
Is it real critical to be conscious about this to our well-being, that we need to know when these times are, or will they happen to us anyway?
Well, I think they happen, as I say, anyway, by the events of our life. And as you know, I've been sort of writing about different aspects of that, like our working life. Something doesn't quite feel comfortable. We begin to get edgy. Maybe we've had a talk with our manager. There's a rumble in the organization that there's going to be some downsizing. We take a look at our resume. These are the normal times of life, as I say.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that this reinvention is, for want of a better word, rather organic. In other words, just like when you're a child and your imagination naturally goes to the skies, to the universe, to the highest realms. You hear about a space shuttle going up, and you start to wonder, what would it be like to be an astronaut? You start making your plan for life. Well, that same impulse, that growthful impulse, strikes us at any time where we're relaxed enough, where we're not distracted, and we can think clearly about what life means to us. So it's both organic, as I say, it's very natural, and at the same time, events can trigger it also.
You're tuned in to Wisdom Radio, and Marsha Sinetar is our guest this hour. As far as self-reinvention, give some specific, say, people examples, either well-known people that we might know and what you've observed, or even somebody that can remain anonymous.
Yeah, well, let's go with an anonymous first of all, because I don't really know people who are in the news that well. But if you take a look at people who, let's say, retire, now that's been a most recent research interest of mine. I have met people that I've interviewed who have retired from one career, a lifelong career, let's say in law or medicine, and they've taken some time to think about what they want to do, and then like George Burns said about, the important thing is to fall in love with your future. They've decided that retiring is not for them, and they could find more enjoyment by starting another business. And this might be a totally different business. I've met recently a man who worked for a big organization, kind of a bureaucratic organization, and always had an interest in art. And when he retired, he decided that he was going to be a sculptor. And he has gone into a totally different direction with his life. He's about, I think now he's in his 70s, and he's making a good deal of money by offering a kind of upscale sculpture for the house, one-of-a-kind accoutrements to the house. This is an example of what we see around us every day if we're open to it. And the thing I have to say about that, Carolyn, is that our assumptions, whether we think we can do this, shape our ability to do it. So in other words, if you have the assumption, like this man did, that, hey, I'm still young, I don't care what age I am, I can do this. If you've got that in your mind, you're going to be able to do it. You're going to take the imaginative steps, the bold steps. You're going to use a little bit of your savings to carve out a niche for yourself. On the other hand, if you have an idea that says, I'm too old, life is over, it's, I got an email from someone the other day who called, he's probably a gentleman in his, 70 or something. He called it a most dismal time. And you see the difference between one who is reaching for something totally different and fresh and someone who feels life is over.
I think, too, that people who, it's like many of us at times in our life, rather than just categorizing us or we or them, many times in our life we really want something new, but are hanging on like the chimpanzee with his hand in the cage and holding on to the peanuts or whatever it was, that we're holding on to the way we have been and how we've greeted the world, how the personality of the role that we've played, and wanting to be different, wanting to be stronger, wiser, a better leader, or wanting to step away from leadership, whatever it is, that we have to give up something, and so sometimes won't reinvent.
Well, there's two ways I want to come at this. First of all, if there's too much fear, that's a red flag to me, and the individual owes it to themselves, whoever it is, and we all go through this occasionally, owes it to themselves to get some, at least counseling help, a trustworthy friend, a rabbi, a minister, a counselor of some sort, because fear just says to me that the individual is not ready, that there's too much attachment to what's been, and not enough optimism about what could be. And we don't know, of course, what patterns in that individual's life are holding them back. I liken it to a child that's afraid of the water, and a loving parent wouldn't take that child and throw them into the deep end. That's abusive, and they could drown. So what you want to do is put their little toes in first. Just let them feel how luxurious that water is.
That's a good example to step into it and then pull it back out.
Right, exactly.
We're talking about self-reinvention, the task of our lifetime, and Marsha Sinetar is our guest. You're listening to Wisdom Radio. I'm Carolyn Craft, and stay with us. We'll be back after this break.
Now, back to Carolyn Craft's Inner Wisdom on Wisdom Radio.
When does self-reinvention become a lifetime task? Marsha Sinetar is with us this hour. She founded her own human resource advisory firm in 1980, and she also is her books are used worldwide in a growing number of professional settings in colleges and therapy and spiritual direction programs. We'll give you more about Marsha, how you can log on to find out more about her and her books as we go through this hour. You know, Marsha, in speaking or describing, I guess, what self-reinvention could possibly look like, I'm thinking about, in one case, thinking about Madonna,
Right.
as an actor, how she reinvents herself. But it's not that kind of reinvention I know that you're talking about. And I remember at 35 leaving the commercial broadcast world. 3 years later, I ended up in the Metaphysical Order of Unity,
Right.
becoming an ordained minister at that time. But it took 3 years of painful letting go and also expectation. But I think it was the letting go that made space for the reinvention to take place, and it meant letting go of the way I saw myself.
Well, that is so true, because we have a tendency to see ourselves in a role, like I am a mother or I am a teacher, as opposed to something that's a little bit different, like in your case, going into the ministry that you just talked about. But one thing I want to say about reinvention is not necessarily a drastic change. What we're talking about is our identity, our true inner core, finding its rightful place in the scheme of things. And there's always another way, always a more fulfilling way to do that. So, for example, let's take somebody like Whoopi Goldberg, who started out as a single mother. She was broke. I think she was on welfare, the story goes. And she began to inch into performing. She loved it while working on the side or doing whatever it was she did. And I think I remember hearing that she went into a small local community theater. And little by little she grew. And what came out of her, and this relates to what I'm talking about, this identity. What came out of her was a performing artist who was also a leader. In other words, she's dominating her field because she found her rightful place in it. You see what I mean?
Yes.
And I think that if we can ask ourselves, for example, you look for patterns in your life, and I can give you an example, a little exercise your listeners can ask themselves if you wish. But we look for patterns about our motivation. What has always turned me on? What characterizes my relationships with people? What kind of role do I take? Whereas, what tasks do I like to do? Have I always enjoyed doing? What talents seem to want to come out? This way, we're bringing out more of who we are as opposed to changing or rupturing who we are.
It sounds like the old example of the onion peeling back, that you're actually getting more to the core of who you are.
That is exactly what it's like. And you can do this by, for example, you can take 5 or 6 blocks of time in your life, depending on how old you are. You can go from childhood through young adulthood, through adulthood, through the current if you're older. And you can say, what achievements have really fulfilled me, irrespective of what other people thought of it. What did I find fulfilling? And you write down a few of these, and then you start to look for those patterns I mentioned. What turned me on? What relationship was I a leader? Did I enjoy working in a team? Was I clarifying for people? You see what I mean?
Yes.
And you say to yourself, well, what talents was I using? It's that sort of thing. We're kind of detectives to that unfolding process.
You're listening to Wisdom Radio. I'm Carolyn Craft speaking with Marsha Sinetar. And Marsha is the best-selling author of Do What You Love, The Money Will Follow, and Ordinary People as Monks and Mystics, and several others. You know what? I was just reminded, Marsha, of your book, Do What You Love, The Money Will Follow. So
Right.
many people quote you from that, and it seems to speak to what you are saying right now, finding what's at the heart of who you are.
Well, actually, that exercise is in that book, and many like them. And I got a letter last week, and it was most fulfilling, and I would love to share it with you. It was from a woman who used to be in a commercial field, and she read that and another book called To Build the Life You Want, Create the Work You Love. And anyway, long story short, it took her 10 years, but she's now an educator at university level, and she's helping students do this same peeling back of the onion to find the real self. Now, this is really fulfilling because you don't realize how much good we can each do if we find our right place in the scheme of things. Then our reinvention is like a greater exploration as opposed to simply rupturing, jumping from one thing to another. It's much more integrated.
I think that some of what creates the violence is that frustrated creativity, and especially if children, teenagers, young adults can get in touch with that. Where there's violence, I think there is, or anger or frustration in its lighter forms, there is creativity or wanting to be and express in the world your full potential, whether you're conscious of it or not.
Right. Well, I have to share a personal story, and I wasn't planning on doing it, but I think I will just from what you've just said. I remember that when I was a teenager, I guess 13, things were not going well at home, and I had that tremendous creative drive, misunderstood in the family setup. I'm not blaming anybody, but what helped me was, and I'm not recommending this, was simply to carve out my own life. In other words, I actively negotiated to leave the family nest. And looking back on it now, I would have to say that's one of the best things I ever did. Because had I stayed, it would have been exactly what you're talking about. Always hitting your head against a wall. And you can love people, and you can feel loved by them and still not feel understood, especially if you're a very creative type of individual, like an artist. Like, for example, I talked about a Whoopi Goldberg. If you listen to interviews of people who are in the media, you will often hear that when they were growing up, it was not an easy time. And what we see is that where there has been an abuse of someone, there's also that high frustration that can lead to upsets in the adult life. It's not a smooth transition if we don't feel connected, if we don't feel contributing and in control of, at least, I don't mean controlling of other people, but at least in control of our best interests.
Well, we've learned that a child that is being abused by a parent, if given the choice to live in a family where there isn't abuse, but it's not with their parents, that they will opt for the abusive parent. It's comfortable. It's what they know. Not comfortable in a good sense, but it's what they know. So I guess our work is in maybe part of the reinvention and peeling back the onion is recognizing those things from whether it was society or the environment or our parents or even in our cellular memory that no longer, that maybe never served us, but no longer serves us.
Yes. I think that what has to happen is that the individual has to find somebody, some trustworthy, stable, nurturing other, and this goes all through life, to have a conversation with that is mature enough that can lead them in the directions that you're talking about. Because otherwise we stay, as you say, we stay in those abusive situations. And we see this all the time when there's a news story about someone that's been abused, and we ask, why did they stay? Well, sometimes there's a warped understanding of what love is. They begin to associate love with violence or love with torment. Oh, this is sick. This is not love. So, one thing that helps in this clarification process is to say to ourselves, what do we cherish? What motivates us? This goes back to what I was talking about. And if we can find the healthiest motivators and cultivate that, for example, you say to yourself in an affirmative way, things tend to work out for me, as opposed to things never work for me. Everybody's against me. You say to yourself, you're just affirming these beliefs to yourself. You're just saying things work out for me. People cooperate with me. I do things at my own pace, as opposed to thinking on the negative. So we can lower our threshold of frustration by what we say to ourselves. And children are not too young to learn that.
You are listening to Wisdom Radio. I'm Carolyn Craft, talking with Marsha Sinetar about reinvention, something we can do not just once in our lifetime, but have the capacity to do in an ongoing way to really bring about a richer life, a fuller life, and be the real person that we were destined to be. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment.
You're listening to Carolyn Craft's Inner Wisdom on Wisdom Radio. Send email to carolyncraft@wisdommedia.com. Once again, here's Carolyn.
And with us this hour is Marsha Sinetar. She's a corporate psychologist, author, educator. She began her professional career as a teacher and then rapidly moved through the ranks of public education and a whole lot more. You're going to know how you can get in touch, at least find out about Marsha and some of her writings and her books. We're talking about self-reinvention. And Marsha, I wanted to share something with you that I know in my own experience in counseling, and have shared this with other counselors, or working with people that are in abusive situations or in poverty, that often they don't seem to have, I say they don't seem to have the capacity, and I imagine someone more enlightened than myself looks at me in the same way, but what can motivate or shake someone out of a limited view of their life, limited capacity?
Well, let me sort of separate the wheat from the chaff here. First, in the abusive situation, we might be talking about therapy. I think we're always talking about therapy. Now, my expertise is not in that direction. So when I talk about motivational patterns, which I want to talk about, I do think that for most of us, now I'm not speaking about the individual who needs to get to a counselor, but even the one that goes to a counselor can be helped by taking a look at what turns them on. I mean, that question is such a charming question. It has so much power to it. For example, we all have, every one of us has a result that we like to obtain through our efforts. It could be to acquire something. It could be to be in charge. It could be to build. I know I love building businesses. I could start a business a day if I had the wherewithal to follow through.
That's why you do so well with these corporate executives,
well,
helping them start it.
I really do love it. And there are things I love more, but that's one of them. There's this drive to discover. There's, for example, the idea of service. And may I say that if we've been, for want of a better word, corrupted by our environment, that motivational pattern may be skewed. In other words, we may feel like we have to be caretakers. And we'll say to ourselves, oh, I'm a born caretaker. But really, we're leaders. You see what I mean? And once we get ourselves squared away, healthier, more wholesome, that leadership is going to come to the fore. On the other hand, we could be put in a leadership position. Maybe we are the oldest child in a family that's, dysfunctional. And we have to take care of our mother or father or uncle, whoever. And we've had that obligation on our shoulders. We think we're meant to do that with our life. And then we get healthier. And all of a sudden we realize, oh, wait a minute, I just love beauty. I love beautifying my neighborhood, my home, my business, whatever. I love these values that are values of the aesthetic side of things. And we end up as a curator in a museum. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So the healthier we get, the more likely it is that that motivational pattern that is born into us, I believe we're created with it, will come to the fore. And another way you can come at it is to say, what tasks do I love doing? What abilities present themselves every time I get in a situation that is fulfilling? What am I doing? Am I writing something? Am I solving a puzzle? Am I designing, inventing something? Am I using my math skills, my singing voice? So that's another way.
Mm-hmm.
But they're different, because you can have a beautiful singing voice, like Beverly Sills, and yet be someone that really wants to run things. So you'd rather run things than sing about it. You know what I mean?
You're tuned in to Wisdom Radio. Marsha Sinetar is with us this hour. I shared earlier, Marsha, that at 35, left the broadcasting world and for 3 years sort of wandered in the desert. And what you're speaking to, I could so relate to, in that being first child and being the leader was where I was. And I remember when I went to Unity, I had one assistant, not a staff of 50 employees. And I remember telling friends, I have one assistant. And for that period of time, it was very effective. It really worked. Then even starting here at Wisdom, I was the first one with the radio group, and then ended up again growing and ended up in a leadership position. But now the leadership feels more like, at least what makes me feel good, is more about growing others, delegating, and working in circle.
Right.
So there's still that, it's exactly what you're talking about. There's still that leaning from childhood, but it's not as much in, at least I try to make it not as much in a dysfunctional way. It surfaces sometimes.
Right, right. And you know, what you're talking about makes me also want to say that we tend to repeat certain patterns even when they're not pleasant patterns, like you talked earlier about abuse. In order to transcend those and move on. So there's this growthful journey. But the growthful journey, if you think of a spiral as opposed to a straight line ladder, let's say, the spiral takes us back through where we've been before so that we can walk that path more confidently, more competently, more expertly and generously, and move on. You see what I mean?
Yes.
So, for example, there's a minister I like. His name is Keith Moore, and he has a saying. He says, pass the test and enter the rest. In other words, every time a problem comes up, and we think to ourselves, oh, no, here we go again. If we look at it as an opportunity to grow in mastery of that problem. Let's say it's a competitive situation and we don't want to pit ourselves against anybody, but somehow we're in there again. Usually if we handle ourselves well, we don't have to handle it again. It's where we hide under the bed, you know what I mean? we run from it, that's when it'll come back to us.
Keeps coming back.
And the same goes with money issues. I know people that have had money issues all their lives. Well, one day they're going to have to be victorious over it, and once they are, in a real substantive sense, they won't ever have to deal with it again.
Where there's that, not that specific problem, but where there's that problem, it usually also is a result of a lot of thoughts about it, a lot of talk about it. It's almost like it continues to be self-fulfilling.
Yes.
And we think we're talking about it in order to get some support, or I don't know why, I don't have any more money, can't get any more. And every word that feeds into that establishes it for the next moment.
Well, that's so true. And the other thing I want to say, and this goes again to self-reinvention, so to pull in some of the loose ends we might have circled here, you see how life is a process of discovery, and that we're always striving to achieve a kind of integrity or wholeness of being. And Carolyn, I have to say that after interviewing literally thousands of people, I mean, it's been, I'm in my 30th year of working on these subjects, so it's not a little bit of time. All ages, all types. I can honestly say that there's a law of being that each of us has. And that law of being is what's trying to come out. So that relates back to this core self, that the core self has an identity that is whole and complete, and it's already there. And when we get into a fix of some sort, all that's happening is that we're trying to gain that equilibrium again. We're trying to get our health back. It's almost like a dis-ease, where we have a flu or something, and we have to go to bed for a few days. And why? So that we get better.
You relate like self-reinvention with having a highest quality of life. How does someone know they're experiencing the highest quality of life?
Well, there are some things that we can do, that we can ask ourselves. Our values, the things and qualities that we cherish, for example, not only motivate us, but they're extremely fulfilling. It's like I was talking about the values that come out in our work, the motivational patterns. We find that extremely satisfying. So I think one of the ways that we can say to ourselves, how's my quality of life, is we can say, how fulfilled am I? And one, maybe more than one, but there's like 2 or 3 things that seem to bring us into that balance. And then I can give you a little exercise to do. But a rightly ordered life, if I say that phrase to you, it's going to mean one thing. If I say it to somebody else or to myself, it's going to mean another. But each of us has an idea or a sense of what a rightly ordered life should be. And another thing that makes us feel fulfilled is where we're true to ourselves, to that law of being that I was talking about. So that's another thing we can say. We can say, to what degree do the things that I value crop up in my life? And I was going to give you a little exercise that is fun to do. It's not very complex. You can say, if I were going to invite to dinner 5 miracle workers, it could be someone that's a longevity expert. It could be a job placement person. It could be a health and beauty expert. It could be a wealth builder or a popularity coach or a family guidance person. And you can pick any 5 who had a particular area of expertise. Who would you invite and why? So you get in touch with your feelings about the questions you have about things that are going on in your life. And then the second thing, you ask yourself, what am I doing now to achieve what I think my miracle worker could do for me?
I love that.
It's a wonderful exercise.
Yeah. Marsha Sinetar is with us this hour, best-selling author of numerous books. Of those, Do What You Love, The Money Will Follow, Ordinary People as Monks and Mystics, and many more. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of those people who have found their fulfillment and self-reinvented themselves by scaling back. Stay with us. We'll be back in just a moment.
Now, back to Carolyn Craft's Inner Wisdom on Wisdom Radio.
And who do you see? Who are the most content around you in your life? When do you feel the most content? And how did these people get that way? Was it good luck or good karma? Well, Marsha Sinetar is with us this hour talking about self-reinvention, the task of our lifetime. And Marsha, I wanted to ask you, you've shared I know in your writings and shared with me earlier that sometimes it's about scaling back as far as self-reinvention. What have you witnessed?
Well, the first formal research study that I did had to do with adults who were actually valuing simplicity. I would say, along with others who have looked at that simplicity movement, that they had a rich inner life, and outwardly their life was fairly simple, austere even. For example, there were individuals who began to give up certain social distractions. I think a lot of it had to do with a coherency that they wanted in their life. These were men and women, urban and rural, from the individual who gave away almost all of his business suits and had just a few little, denim outfits that he had in his closet. Very simple. Lived in an urban area, very Spartan apartment, walked to work, no car, low consumption, to the mother who lived in a rural area, homeschooled her children, grew her own vegetables, that kind of thing. These were individuals who had 5 elements to their values or their worldview, I want to say. First, they valued simplicity, so it wasn't that anybody was telling them to do it or that circumstances dictated. They went out and sought it. A low-maintenance, low-consumption lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is that they tended to experience their work as a service or a calling, even as devotional. So you'd have an inventor or a painter, or, as I said, the mother with the homeschooling of her children, or teachers, craftspersons very often fit into this profile. And I had one extraordinarily wealthy financial advisor, investor type, who saw what they did as a calling, and this made a great difference in their ability to let go of one thing and go to another. They had a very highly developed aesthetic consciousness. So there tended to be a worldview where they saw, for example, people as interrelated. Art was very important, music, the aesthetic of the home, certain kind of order to their relationships, and as I say, very little distraction, very focused individuals. And they were self-actualizing also. So I began to take a look, especially at the work part of it, because that interests me. And, of course, then I spotted it everywhere I looked, and now every time I go into a company even, I can see individuals who fit that profile. And it's usually about 10% of any group.
I was thinking, too, that earlier you said that the reinvention doesn't have to, self-reinvention doesn't have to do with major changes, but it can be some minor ones. And the thought occurred to me that you can even hold the same job,
yes,
or you have the same wife or husband,
yes,
but your internal, there's an internal shift, and you go into that with a totally different perspective, and things change just like you have changed jobs.
Yes, that's exactly. It's very perceptive and correct to say that. And in fact, all change begins from the internal shift. And you know yourself, you might be stewing about some problem. Should I do this or should I do that? You're reading fortune cookies, trying to figure out which way to go. And one day you get up and it's all laid out for you in your mind. And you know exactly what you're going to do or what you're not going to do, whether it's a surgery or whether it's a divorce or a marriage or whatever it is. But it starts from within. And as you say, some of these shifts, it's almost like, I had a friend that used to say, life is very much like making a sculpture. And sometimes you need a hammer, and sometimes you need a little, very subtle nail file. So I think what you're talking about is the nail file.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all of life is that filing away of everything that's untrue and revealing what's true. And that's why I keep talking about health and the gradual letting go of things that don't fit. Another thing that helps in this process I want to mention, and that's really what I call the mentor spirit. The mentor spirit is not that you're sitting with a mentor, sitting at their feet, so to speak, and they're telling you what to do or preaching to you, but that you're looking around. This is kind of like that exercise where you invite people to dinner. You're looking around, let's say, at the world of celebrities or the world of artists or inventors or writers, whoever, excuse me, politicians, and you're saying to yourself, or even your neighbors, family, who do I admire? You start looking for patterns of admiration. And then you ask yourself, what is it about what they project that I have in me that's trying to get out? And you actively do that. So this is very helpful, too.
I've seen where also you can take a look at who you're envious or jealous of, and sometimes that can ignite or fire you up to recognize what's missing in your life and maybe some changes that you do want to make.
Well, yes, you can look at that, and that's kind of that's on the distaff of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You have an intense reaction to something that you've displaced from yourself. You haven't
Exactly.
acknowledged that it's in you.
Yeah.
It's
To
like
let that
Robert Bly talked about the shadow self. It's the part that we haven't accepted. It's like if you dislike someone very much, very often that person that you dislike is going to represent parts of yourself that you haven't accepted or that are very much like you and you're unaware of.
So the adversarial feeling can be informative rather than react to it, but
Always
it can inform.
Always informative, absolutely. And of course, that's just another way into the same idea. But basically, my idea about reinvention, self-reinvention, is we're always hopefully becoming truer to ourselves, more integrated, and reflecting a kind of integrity that was always with us.
Marsha Sinetar is with us. You're listening to Wisdom Radio. I'm Carolyn Craft, and glad you're with us this hour. Marsha, what are some of, in relationship to this self-reinvention in particular, what do you believe to be some of the key issues in our world, in our personal life, in this age right now that we ought to pay attention to?
Well, I'm not sure if you're asking about the world situation.
Well, I think one thing in particular, not that I expected you to answer this way,
Right.
but I'm thinking in particular of the vast loss of jobs right now, and to me it seems like that's not such a bad thing, even though I've still got my job today.
Right.
But that it's causing us to reinvent ourselves, just with that pattern, that it's time now to move away from the industrial, even the technological age, and there's shifting going on. We're reinventing new careers. That's just
Yes.
one thing.
Well, I would say in two areas it seems like the world is taking a shift, if you will, the whole consciousness of the world. One of them you point out in the area of work, where work is really going. It's possible that at some point down the line, and I don't say it's right around the corner, but it's possible that work may not have as important a place in our life as it does today.
I just saw that the other day. There was some high percentage of people that put play or, family above work, way above work.
Well, what I mean is not so much where we put it in our priorities, but that it may even disappear. We may not need to work.
I like that. Yeah.
We may have robots. Robots are now already, I've been saying this for decades, that now that doesn't mean that we're not going to function in a way that is contributive, that we're not going to contribute to our society, but we won't have to earn a living in the same way.
I love it. What a great pick. Bill Turner, our founder, always said that he played anyway. 7 days a week he played.
Well, that's how I feel about the activities that I do. You're functioning in a specific way. You're functioning as a parent, or as a writer, or as an artist, or as a Boy Scout, Girl Scout, troop leader, whatever. But you're not necessarily doing for the money. You're doing it for the money. You're doing it because that's who you are. You're being, capital B, the thing that you're doing. You know what I mean?
What a great way to close this hour with that vision. And Marsha, what is your current website now that we can give everybody?
Oh, it's just MarshaSinetar.com.
M-A-R-S...
Yeah, M-A-R-S-H-A, and then S-I-N-E-T-A-R.
S-I-N-E-T-A-R, MarshaSinetar.com. Thanks again, Marsha, as always.
My pleasure.
You inspire us.
You've inspired me, and thanks so much, Carolyn.
Thank you for listening to Inner Wisdom, and stay tuned for more from Wisdom Radio.
You've been listening to an original production of Wisdom Radio, a division of Wisdom Media Group Incorporated, copyright 2003, all rights reserved. Wisdom Radio, streamed on the World Wide Web at wisdomradio.com and beamed across the country on Sirius Satellite Radio. This is Wisdom Radio.